China's changes to the secrecy laws include transparency on the environment, pollution being a huge concern in the country. And to talk more about the new changes and their impact on China's environment, I'm joined by Linda Greer. She is the Director for Health Programs at the National Resources Defense Council. Her area of focus includes the impact of toxic chemicals on human health and pollution in China. And I want to read to the audience the first sentence from a recent blog. There's something new, exciting, and very different that went into effect New Year's Day in China to address the country's terrible pollution problems that has, not to my knowledge, garnered much attention. This was written by you. You seem very encouraged by this. Why?
I am very encouraged by this, and it's on the basis of our experience in the United States. So here in the United States in the mid-1980s, we began to disclose information about pollution. And lo and behold, it really ratcheted down our levels of pollution. That was in a country that already had a very mature regulatory system, and it was the naming and shaming and the outing of these big polluters that caused them to voluntarily reduce their emissions. And so environmental policy experts in the United States have become big fans of information disclosure. And since China has such a huge air pollution problem, it seemed to me like a very fast way around trying to get some dramatic reductions.
Well, you talk about disclosure, and I'm going to read another, I'm kind of concretizing this because it's a long blog, but you go on to say this initiative puts China clearly in the lead on environmental reporting internationally. No country, to my knowledge, has anything like it. That's saying a lot, isn't it?
Well, you know, China has modernized in the 21st century. America modernized many decades before. And so it has at its disposal routine monitoring technologies that we didn't have in the mid-1980s, and we still don't really use today. So China is really able to take advantage of the fact that it has modernized so recently to have these technologies that the rest of the world didn't have at their disposal when they were setting up their systems. And so they can have real-time monitoring on the internet, which of course in the 1980s the United States couldn't have.
And you feel like citizens getting out there and kind of looking at things and examining this is really going to drive this thing in a way?
Yeah, I think there are three ways it'll be driven. One is with additional citizen supervision. I mean, if you're a person who's living in a city with a terrible air pollution day, and you have a way to see whether your biggest sources are operating out of compliance with their permit or not, that is inevitably going to help to create some pressure on those sources to take the steps necessary to comply with their permits. But beyond that, I think that the sources themselves, what we saw in the United States was that the companies themselves and the managers of the factories themselves were surprised at how large their emissions were relative to their peers. They too could look at this data, and they knew their own information, but not the others. And then they were embarrassed that they were so high, and so they took measures that were beyond what would even be required so that they weren't the number one on the list. You know, who wants to be the biggest polluter in town? That's just a lot of notoriety to have to come to grips with.
Well, you know, the interesting thing is here in the West, a lot of the reporting on China tends to be very negative. And so it's refreshing to read something like your blog entry. I'm just wondering, have there been some naysayers in the community here in the United States who say, you're way off the mark?
There are people that think I'm unduly optimistic, and actually that's unusual for me because I'm quite a cynic. So those that know me, they've really taken notice that I have such an encouraging feeling about this. And it's true that we have to watch how this rolls out. You know, so far there's only 3 provinces that are doing the reporting, but we're hoping that more will follow suit as they begin to have success. You know, there are going to be ways to game the system, and there's going to be a lot of pressure. You know, this is going to take a lot of determination on the part of local officials and citizens to get this to cross the finish line and not kind of collapse upon itself. But honestly, when you look at the choices available to China in terms of what would I do if I were queen for the day and I could do anything, I think that information disclosure would just bring in a lot of the momentum that really the government needs in order to be able to do its job.
Recently, I interviewed a couple of guys who wrote a book about the lung-searing quality of Southern California air, and that's where I grew up, and it definitely was lung-searing. But they said a lot of it was driven by the citizens also kind of getting up in arms. But it does take a long time to turn the corner when you're talking about significant pollution. When can people start to really see results, do you think?
Well, in this line of work, bad news is sort of good news because it means that there are some really juicy, low-hanging fruit opportunities to make a difference. So what we can already see from analysis is that if the biggest sources simply meet their new stringent permit levels, that is going to make a huge reduction in loading because we have some big bad problems out there. Similarly, we know that there are certain industries that are very heavy coal consumers. We know that we have to reduce that coal consumption by increasing the efficiency of those particular industries. So the data allows you to get the biggest bang for the buck and really rake out a lot of pounds early. I would expect that we would see results quite quickly, and that the curve would go down quickly, and that then will level off as it becomes more difficult. But we've got some really juicy opportunities that step out with the data already that I think will lead to visible differences in a short period of time.
Well, Linda, we're going to have to leave it there, but thanks for, it's always nice to have some optimism on a news broadcast, so we appreciate you coming in.
Thanks for
For more